Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we have a interesting topic today. Something a little bit different. We're taking a look at NHL relocation cities. Now, I've made this video a couple of times in my 3 years here on the channel, but I think we have to reevaluate because now we're into 2022. So this is the early edition in 2022. The potential NHL markets that are available, where would the NHL like to go? Whether it's expansion, adding to the NHL's already 32 NHL teams, more than likely we probably would see a sort of expansion draft similar to what we've seen here with Vegas and Seattle. Whether they do two teams in like 3 or 4 years. That way the teams aren't just getting front loaded with two drafts in the same year for in 1 year having two drafts for two different teams. So that kind of seems like the new way they're doing things instead of like we saw in 2000 bringing in two teams at once. Or do we see relocation? Now, I'm not wearing the Senators jersey because I think they're going to get relocated. That's obviously a possibility. But I remember I've seen a lot of different things on how long Senators fans were waiting to get a team back in Ottawa. And they wanted that team to be called the Ottawa Senators, of course, right? So the return of the Ottawa Senators took a really long time. Are we seeing something similar to that right now? It kind of happened here with Seattle. That dream has come true, bringing a team back to Seattle as the Metropolitans were in the NHL very, very long time ago, back in the dinosaur age. But now Houston and a couple of other cities are being mentioned in terms of bringing a team either back to Houston or bringing an NHL team to a city that hasn't had an NHL team. So we're going to be going over some of those cities. We're going to be going over the population, the teams that are currently in that host city, the competition that we are going to see for that said NHL team. So we'll be going over all of that. Now, first, I do want to give credit to Puck Empire and NHL Instagram account. I follow them. They give me some really good stuff. So I do want to give them credit for kind of sparking the idea of this video for me and kind of going along with it. So credit there to Puck Empire. So with that said, let's get going. So the first city we have to talk about is the white elephant in the room, and that is the city of Houston. Houston, Texas. We're heading down to the Lone Star State. We already have an NHL franchise in the state of Texas, obviously up in Dallas. But Houston is another market that the NHL would probably like to potentially delve into. Now, the reason for that is their population. Out of all the teams that I have here listed, Houston is the biggest market that the NHL has yet to tap. And that makes you wonder, that's probably why they're looking to do that. Houston's grown a significant amount in really the past 2 decades. And we're starting to see them really start to get on the rise, gaining lots of attention. At 2.3 million people populating the city of Houston, that is obviously going to be a target. We saw a team, the Houston Aeros, back in the 80s and 90s. We saw an AHL team in the 2000s. So they've had hockey in Houston, professional hockey, in the past 50 years. So it wouldn't be that much of a shock if we saw a team go to Houston. Now, you'd have to think the color scheme-wise, they'd probably try and go with the state flag. We saw the Dallas Stars potentially do that, go with that attempt. And they'd probably take on a similar vein to the Houston Texans, who are currently an NFL team. And speaking of that, there is some of their competition. It is the Houston Texans as the first team here. The Houston Texans are a big NFL team. They've kind of been a little bit rocky recently. You have the Houston Rockets, an NBA team, the Houston Astros, a Major League Baseball team, and the Houston Dynamo of Major League Soccer. So you have 4 different competitors already in the city of Houston. The thing is, it's kind of weird the NHL isn't there because obviously they are a market because they've got a lot going on. The problem is the NHL going to be enough where they could also fit in there? That's why the last 2 expansions you saw the NHL go to markets that aren't nearly as saturated. For example, Vegas was the Golden Knights were the first professional franchise in the Sin City. And obviously we've seen teams kind of follow in their footsteps with the Las Vegas Raiders. And we're starting to see that kind of go away. And eventually we'll probably see an NBA team in Vegas. That's my assumption. So that's kind of where that's going to end up leading to. But in terms of Houston, again, there's a lot there already. So is it too saturated where you don't see an NHL team because there's just too much going on already? Or do they look at all those people and just big money signs in the eyes of Gary Bettman, just seeing the population? Is that enough for the NHL to go that direction? The NHL also wants to tap into non-traditional hockey markets. Texas is definitely an example of that and would definitely be a fit in that regard for the NHL. Moving on, we're heading up to the Northeast, actually more toward the lakes. We're heading to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A lot of you guys in the comments have mentioned Milwaukee a significant amount of times. So we're going to give some light here to the city of Milwaukee. The population is much, much less than Houston, so that's not in their favor. At 2.31 million for Houston, 594.5 thousand population. So a much, much smaller, pretty much a quarter of the population that inhabits the city of Houston. But there is some leeway here for a team in Milwaukee. So their competition, you have the Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA. They're a pretty good team. I believe they just won the national title here in 2021. The Milwaukee Brewers, they've had some interesting spots. They've potentially been a team on the move, but I think that's more because of their ownership. And we have a professional hockey team in the city of Milwaukee, and that is the Milwaukee Admirals, the AHL affiliate of the Nashville Predators. So there would be some crossover there. Now, does this mean that Milwaukee has to leave and, get up out of Milwaukee? That's not necessarily the case. We've seen the Chicago Wolves, who are an AHL team. It's kind of funny, the St. Louis Blues AHL affiliate playing in the same city as the Chicago Blackhawks, who their AHL team is in Rockford, right? So we've seen this happen before. This isn't necessarily this crazy thought, but it is interesting to see how that's kind of playing into effect here. So I wonder where they're going to go with that. Again, population-wise, not the most attractive market, but again, in the Midwest, there is some questions about could the NHL maybe kind of get themselves in that market, because they haven't really gone that way. You look at a lot of people recently have been mentioning a team in Cleveland, not too far away from Columbus. That's kind of close though. You have like Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Could they put a team in Green Bay, right? Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then Milwaukee, right? Milwaukee's in that vein as well. So obviously, they're very loyal fan bases. I mean, you look at, they don't have an NFL team in Milwaukee, but the Green Bay Packers are a huge draw in the state of Wisconsin. They have really big college teams as well. So they have a devotion to sports. It's just, is that population maybe going to deter Gary Bettman from going into the Midwest? Because again, there's a reason there aren't a ton of NHL teams there. They tend to stay on the coasts because there's more population there. And that's kind of just how this works. It's not really fair. It's not right. That's just how it is. Flat out numbers-wise, Milwaukee would definitely be lower on the list already than the city of Houston. If the NHL was desperate to bring in an NHL team, which they aren't, and again, you have to find an owner that's willing to fork over the huge amount of money. There doesn't seem to be an owner in Milwaukee that wants to do that at this moment. So that's kind of stuff where we've heard rumblings here and there from private investors, but nothing concrete, nothing serious. It's just more of where in the United States could the NHL go. Now, speaking of that, we're going to head up to the north of the border. We're going to have our first Canadian team on this list, and that is Hamilton, Ontario. This is not the first time. This isn't even the second or third time we've heard a team potentially going to Hamilton. In the late 90s, early 2000s, they made a pitch to bring in 3 different organizations. The Arizona Coyotes were on that list. The Nashville Predators, only a couple years in their existence in Nashville. And the Pittsburgh Penguins. All 3 of those organizations were extremely close, specifically Pittsburgh, before Crosby came in and Malkin bought the team. before Crosby came in and Lemieux bought the team, there was a lot of talk that the Pittsburgh Penguins were this close to being moved to the city of Hamilton. Now, there's a couple factors here as well we have to keep in mind. So, looking at the population, it's pretty similar to the city of Milwaukee. 579,500 people in the city of Hamilton. Now, again, it's actually smaller than Milwaukee. And again, when you compare it to Houston, still extremely small, pretty much a quarter of the population. Now, that doesn't mean everything. Again, devoted fan base, this and that. But still, when you look at it that way, that's going to be hard to do. And the other thing you have to remember here is, the distance between Hamilton and, say, Ottawa, Montreal, they're kind of in that bubble there in Ontario where there's so many other, NHL franchises. So that has been a problem for other teams, and specifically in that area, especially if they've talked about bringing in another Toronto team. The problem is everybody's going to cheer on the Toronto Maple Leafs because they've been the team that your grandfather and your great-grandfather and your uncle and this and that and everybody else cheered on, and that kind of just sticks. So it's going to be very hard to draw a fan base when you already have direct competition like that. And you see in other markets, the Islanders and Rangers rivalry is another good example. The old-time hockey fans more likely to be Ranger fans, and then fans that became hockey fans in the 80s and 90s, when more likely the 80s when the Islanders were winning cups. You could tell there is a generational divide in that. And that's just one example, but you see that across all different sports. You see it right now in the NFL, bandwagon teams and stuff like that. That's just how it works. NBA. So there is some competition outside of the professional realm in hockey. There's also the CFL, the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So that's a Canadian Football League team. You also have an Ontario Hockey League team, a junior team in the OHL, the Hamilton Bulldogs. They were also an AHL team back in the day of the Montreal Canadiens. Things obviously have gone in a different direction. They've now got a team in Laval. So that has kind of changed. And they also have I don't know what CPL is. It's Forge FC. That's Forge Football Club, right? So it's, I assume, a soccer team. So they have a Canadian Soccer League. So there is something to be said that there isn't, quote-unquote, true professional sports there. You could argue the Canadian Football League, but, I mean, let's be honest. A Hamilton team could definitely draw more interest than those other squads. But again, is the market too small? Is there going to be pushback from other teams in the NHL, like Montreal and Toronto, because of their proximity? I think that's all been on the table in the past. Supposedly, Montreal and Toronto blocked a team to Hamilton back in the early 2000s. So that's kind of the stuff you have to keep an eye on. We've heard of ownership. There has been rumors of owners that are interested in buying a team. But again, at this point, it's out there, but it doesn't seem extremly, it's not the NHL's, I would say, even second or third option at this point. Now, staying in Canada here, we've got Quebec City, Quebec. Now, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory, and based off of a video I did, this just shows you how crazy this fan base is. I made a video probably 2 years ago. My most famous video happened to be a video where I put the Quebec Nordiques logo in it and some French hockey news thing about, it was basically a fan website for the Nordiques, and they put my video in there, and I had to put everything in Google Translate what they were saying because I couldn't really understand French. But I mean, that is how crazy they are. I don't even think the Coyotes have, kind of a fan base like that, and I'm saying that in the most sincere way I can, but let's be honest, that's just kind of how it goes. I think there's also a little bit of sting still from the first time the Nordiques left, the first season. They were outside of Quebec. They won a Stanley Cup the next season with Patrick Roy in Colorado. I think that hurt a little bit. So maybe their second season in Quebec or Colorado. So yeah, I think that's kind of the thing you have to look at here. Now, here's something else you have to mention. Their population, it is smaller than even Hamilton. It's smaller than Houston, again, by a large margin. With Milwaukee, Hamilton, pretty similar, but Quebec City is even smaller than that. And you look at Quebec City, 542,500 people. You look at their quote-unquote sports that are in the area. You have the Quebec Capitales, which I have no idea what the FL is. Probably Football League, I assume. And the Quebec City Ramparts, who are in the QMJHL, right? So the Quebec team, the Ramparts, they are one of the bigger teams in Canadian hockey, in the Canadian Hockey League. And that's because of Quebec. They are just a huge, huge fan base. I remember, again, multiple times. How many times do we see the Jets fans? Same thing. Go to different events. The Nordiques, I think once a year they go down to New Jersey and they say bring back the Nordiques. They take over an entire section of the Prudential Center. They did it at the Coliseum for the Islanders for a while. They've done it in Nashville. It's one of the most bizarre things, but it is quite cool. And I think Quebec would definitely, again, they have a small market, but you know that of those 542,500 people, a lot of them are going to be NHL fans. So that is something that we're going to have to kind of watch and follow up on. But I think Quebec City, other than Houston, I think Quebec is second on that list right now. All right, so now we're heading back to Texas. A lot of Texas teams here. San Antonio, Texas is our spot here. This is the second largest population, so it is still half the size of Houston's population, but 1.5 million people, which is pretty impressive. And you look at their competition, there are two professional teams in MLS, Major League Soccer. You have the San Antonio Flight Club and the San Antonio Spurs of the NBA. So there is something to be said here for a team in San Antonio. Now, not currently at this point, but just a few years ago, the Colorado Avalanche had an affiliate. Before they moved up to Colorado to become the Colorado Eagles of the American Hockey League, that was also I believe it was an ECHL team, now an AHL team. The Colorado Avalanche's affiliate used to be the San Antonio Rampage. You guys should look up those jerseys. Really nice jerseys. I could probably get one if I wanted, but I have really nothing to do with it. But San Antonio is definitely an attractive option for the NHL. Again, non-traditional hockey market, a pretty big population. So there's something to be said here that could work. And they already have professional sports there. And it's not like Milwaukee, where there is a bunch of franchises. There's only, let's be honest, the MLS is fourth to the NHL, who is third. You could argue NBA, NFL, maybe baseball, maybe hockey at this point. I think it's debatable at this point because of the fall from Major League Baseball over the past couple of years. So MLS gets beat out. Now it's really the San Antonio Spurs that the NHL has to deal with. And they've done that in other cities. How many other cities do we see the NHL share a building with an NBA team? That could work. Now, I think the Rampage, I'm already assuming they're going to call them that. But whatever team they name in San Antonio, if they get a team, you're going to probably see a new building. Because it's one of those things where, if you guys remember the Barclays Center for the Islanders, it was too small of a stadium. And it's more of a basketball-built stadium. That's kind of what you have in San Antonio. Same thing out on the West Coast with the SAP Center. The Sharks have their own building. The Golden State Warriors have their own building. What's it called? Like Allianz Arena or something? It's only for basketball. It's too small for the NHL. So that would probably be on the table here for San Antonio as well. But again, you don't have too much competition. You have a huge population. And you're in the South in a non-traditional hockey market. I think Gary Bettman would definitely consider San Antonio, at least in my opinion, as a top 5 team on that list. Now we're heading to the West Coast. Again, we're continuing the theme of non-traditional hockey markets, but this one's a little bit more saturated, and I'll explain that in a second. San Diego, California. San Diego, California. I don't think there'd be too many NHL players that would say no to signing in a free agency deal, moving from Edmonton or Boston to, say, go to San Diego and live on the Manhattan beaches. I don't think too many people are going to say no to that. Also, they have a great population, 1.4 million people in San Diego. Now, here's the other part you have to remember, because as you guys know, I mean, if you look at it on a map, it is very congested in California. We already have 3 California teams in a fairly small radius. The San Jose Sharks, the LA Kings, and the Anaheim Ducks. I haven't gotten there yet. So you have 3 NHL franchises, not to mention the amount of AHL teams that have recently gone west. A lot of teams that were in the Northeast playing in Maine. Who else was there? There was a team in Portland, Worcester. There was a team there. I'm trying to remember who else was up that way. There was a couple of teams up there. They have since gone the other way. They have all gone to the West Coast. Perfect example, the Ontario Reign in the AHL. The San Diego Gulls, who we're getting to here. You also have Stockton, the Stockton Heat. They're in Stockton, California. You also have the Bakersfield Condors of the Edmonton Oilers. That's 4 different teams right there. Not to mention the San Jose Barracuda, who also play at SAP Arena or SAP Center in San Jose. So that's 5 AHL teams, 3 NHL teams in that market, in that, the greater area market, but in that area. Is there room for an NHL franchise in San Diego? That is the question that still needs to be asked. Oh, yeah. Also forgot, make that 6 AHL teams, because we have the Coachella Valley Firebirds, the Seattle Kraken's AHL team, coming in there as well. There you go. So just a ton of California teams. They could basically build their own division at this point there. So we've gotten that kind of out of the way. We're going to get through the next couple of cities here as well, and it's kind of the same theme. But in San Diego alone, they have the San Diego Padres in baseball, the San Diego Gulls, the Anaheim Ducks AHL affiliate, the AHL, the San Diego Seals, that is a lacrosse team, so you're kind of pulling for there, and the San Diego Loyal SC. I don't know what USL is, but that is also in there. You guys can let me know in the comments. So here's the problem. And this is what I talked about with Hamilton. Huge population. Lots of people. Very congested. You could definitely get something in there. You have tons of airports and stuff. No problems there. Beautiful area. Really nice and scenic. But there's a problem here. The big but. And that is you have so much going on already. Like I said, you have the San Diego Gulls. A lot of those fans are already Ducks fans. So how do you really, again, it's kind of like Hamilton, where you're putting a team in an area where there is already probably a strong attraction to a different franchise that's already there. And if they're not a Ducks fan, they're a Kings fan. And if they're not a Kings fan because the Sharks were good over the last 5 or 6 years, then they're a Sharks fan. So to put a team in San Diego, again, there's something to it. But if you look on a map at how congested that would be, there are 4 teams in an extremely, extremely close proximity to each other. I just don't know if the NHL is going to do that. And it's kind of the situation where you have New York, right? You have 3 New York area teams, New Jersey, and the 2 New York teams. It works, but how much can you do? Are you going to have a team in San Diego? Are you going to have a team we're going to talk about in a second here in San Francisco? So, how much can you really do? Now, here we go. We're going to get into San Francisco. So, San Francisco, California, a much smaller population at 875,000 people in the city of San Francisco. Now, here's the other thing. I think political-wise, this is also going to be a problem, and I don't want to talk about this too much, but California is also seeing a huge mass of people leaving, so I wonder if these stats are not necessarily what they are right now. It may not be as accurate as we have right here. So just keep that in mind. And that's also something the NHL is looking at, saying, do we really want to put a team right now in that environment? So bear with that what you will. They did just put a team in Seattle, which was probably in a worse state. So you could argue that, but that is something just food for thought there. You have 2 teams in San Francisco. You have the Golden State Warriors, like I already said, and you have the San Francisco Giants. Those 2 teams are extremely close to San Jose in the Bay Area. They're basically just outside that area. So does it make sense to have San Jose and a San Francisco team as really the 2 teams in the same market, and then the Ducks and the Kings in their own same market closer to Hollywood? I don't know. That's a lot going on, and I just don't know if the NHL is going to fully press that desire right now. There's been a lot of talk about bringing a team to San Francisco, to Oakland. They just lost their baseball team, so maybe there's a need to fill a void there. They obviously lost the Oakland Raiders to Vegas a couple of years ago, so there is something to be said about potentially Oakland, San Francisco as a destination for the NHL. With that said, kind of the reason those two teams are on the verge, the A's on the verge, and the Raiders leaving, is because they couldn't get anything done through city council. Very similar to what we're seeing right now in Calgary. The Calgary Flames had an arena, ready to go. They had everything, blueprints, everything ready to go, money, set in the right places, and then it fell through because they didn't want to invest. The city didn't want to invest the money, and let's be honest, the ownership too has to take some fault here. They weren't willing to fork up the extra money. So I think that's kind of what you're dealing with in California in general, whether it's San Francisco. But again, we're seeing it right now in San Francisco, Oakland, with other franchises. Does an owner really want to deal with that? And I think that's part of the thing. It might be easier to build a building in Milwaukee than it is right now out in California. And that's just the facts of it. That's just how it is. And that is it for today's video. Really, the context you have to remember here is the NHL is looking. And I think right now, with the pandemic, with everything that's gone on from really 2020 up until now, it's a setback for the NHL. The NHL is on a flat salary cap. So the NHL is thinking one of two things. One, we want to bring in an NHL team because that's going to flood a ton of money, into the NHL's pool. Because you got to think, right? The NHL salary cap is $87.5 million, right? When Seattle came in, that was $87.5 million of cap space just added across the entire league. And that's why we saw the market change so much. That's why contracts have gotten bigger this past offseason, specifically defensemen, right? The big Seth Jones deal, Darnell Nurse, all of those guys, Miro Heiskanen, who actually probably got snubbed. So that set the market when the Seattle Kraken came in. It kind of changed the context. So the NHL could be looking at another NHL team as kind of a lifeboat to kind of bring in some cash. The problem with that is, though, what owner is going to want to fork the money right now in order to buy that team with, pretty much the hemorrhage of money that you could be putting yourself into with games being canceled, with not having full stadiums? Is an owner right now thinking the most successful way for me to make money is to buy an NHL team or any professional sports team right now? Probably not. It's not the safest bet right now until things kind of stabilize and we figure out how to move forward with this whole thing. If we ever move forward from this whole thing, we have to remember that it's a lot involved. Again, unions and stuff like that. Like, there's just so much involved. The workers, how much they get paid in California is going to be a lot higher than Milwaukee. Like, there is so much little nitty-gritty things that you have to account for. And I think that's also going to come into the conversation. No state tax, right? You saw two Texas teams here. That's going to be more attractive. So it's those little things that you're not thinking about. You're just thinking, a team would look nice in San Antonio or a team would look nice in Quebec. But when you look at the Canadian dollar, the gap between that and the US dollar, there's a huge gap there. That's why we saw teams leave, like the Winnipeg Jets and the Quebec Nordiques, because the Canadian dollar was just way too high. They just could not, they couldn't stay in line with the NHL. And again, even salaried contracts, that all comes into it as well. The no state tax, the location, all of that. And that is something you have to remember when you look at who is truly the best fit for a new NHL franchise. I'm going to give you guys, out of the teams I talked about here, a top three. First one, Houston. That's a slam dunk for me. I think Houston is the team that should get one first. I think that's pretty well regarded throughout the hockey community. I think most people would agree with me on that. Obviously, my Canadian fans, would feel a little bit snubbed, like they should have got a team in Quebec. But again, the Canadian dollar, they would be better off going to Milwaukee than Quebec. So, again, as frustrating as that is, I'd love to see a team in Quebec. I'd love to get a Nordiques jersey, a real red and blue Nordiques jersey like they had with the Saint emblems on the bottom or along the crest. But at the end of the day, is it feasible? Does it make sense financially? Again, we're going to see a team in San Diego before we see a team in Quebec, in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think. Guys, so like I said, Houston, I'm going to go with San Antonio second. And let's be honest, I'm going to go with San Diego third. I'm going to go with the big populations because that means a lot. And I think that is something that the NHL would contribute. Not too far down the list, though, would be Quebec. But at this point, I can't put them in the top three. Again, because of financial reasons, being in Canada with the Canadian dollar and all that other little nitty-gritty intangible stuff, I just don't see it happening right now. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you again next time.